everyone, and welcome to Can I Just Say? I'm Elizabeth Stevens.
And I'm Daphne Olive.
And it's been a while, Daphne. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited to be talking about stuff again. I've had strong urges to talk about stuff, and I have to say,
well, you at least had an Outlander podcast in between. I haven't talked to you since Jane Eyre.
That's true. That's true. I did have an Outlander podcast between. But still, it's been a while, and I'm so excited. And I'm so excited that you suggested that we talk about The Godfather as the beginning of the year.
Well, you've been talking about it for so long, since our Black Sales days.
I have been talking about it since our Black Sales days.
And it's criminal that I've never seen it.
I'm so excited that you have now.
Me too. Twice now. Yes. Although I have to say the second time was in little bits and pieces as I went about my day. It is a 3-hour long movie.
It is a 3-hour long movie.
Yeah. So you have to really commit. And it's not one that's a good background movie either, because it has such strong visual language.
Yes, it does. Very strong visual language. Yes. And I should say right now, I don't know if this will be true for people listening long in the future, but people who are listening to this right now, it is on Netflix in the United States. So watch it. I don't know how long that'll be. I was so surprised to see that it was. All three of them are.
I should ask you now, should I watch the other two?
You should watch the second one. Absolutely.
Okay.
It's funny. My husband and I were just talking about that today, because he did watch. Oh, we have the box set. I watch it on Netflix now, but we do have the box set, and so he recently watched all three of them. Again, the third movie is not anywhere near as good as the first and second.
That tends to be the way of things.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I might bring up should I? I guess I shouldn't spoil the later movies. No, I won't. Okay, never mind. I'm going to take that out. So, yeah.
You and spoilers are so adorable. These are 30, 40-year-old movies. That's okay.
But we have so many listeners that on Twitter were saying that they're going to watch it for the first time.
Well,
because we're talking about it, which just warms my heart and makes me happy.
Yeah, that's hype. That's a deep honor, I feel like, actually. Yeah, especially a 3-hour movie.
Well, and also if, I don't know. I just feel like this is a film that is very important in its own right, but also very important for cinema generally. And I can't speak with a whole lot of authority about that. I never studied cinema. Kind of wish I had. This is a movie. I mean, I'm sure you had this experience. This is a movie that you watch and you're like, oh, that's what every other movie or TV show or all these things were referencing all along.
Sure, absolutely. It's so funny because the first one that really came into my mind was from You've Got Mail, because they reference The Godfather all the time as kind of like a running joke. What is it with men and The Godfather? I don't know if you remember that or not.
I do not remember that, and that's hilarious.
I do. And Tom Hanks has this bit in You've Got Mail where he's like, the answer to any of life's questions is in The Godfather. And so he just rattles off a couple of lines, and that's how I knew about going to the mattresses and leave the gun, take the cannoli.
Yep.
But what's funny is that I was waiting this whole movie for I could have been a contender before I realized that was a different film.
Yes,
years before.
That.
I was waiting. It never came.
Right, it's true. Not every single iconic line comes from this movie, but a lot of them do.
Generally, if someone's doing Marlon Brando, they're doing, Vito Corleone. So,
that's funny.
Or I thought so. I guess I was wrong, because the contender one is one that everybody always does. But I guess that's
there. Yeah, there's a lot of Marlon Brando.
On the waterfront.
That's on the waterfront.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, haven't seen clearly.
I saw that a very long time ago, and I'll bet it's totally worth rewatching.
I'm sure.
There are probably people laughing right now thinking with me saying that as if it's a question mark. Yes, it's probably totally worth watching again. This movie is just part of, I feel like, my personal history, and I do love it. And for our Fathoms Deep listeners who are listening, this, I brought it up in Fathoms Deep. It is 209.
Because it was pretty heavily referenced. Yeah.
209. It is so visually referenced. I believe this strongly. And it's, watching it again now. And also, I brought it up when we talked about Elizabeth, the same thing about the leader being calmly busy with something while their minions are off doing the assassinations. And not just that those two things are happening, but the cutting back and forth and back and forth. Anytime you see that, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, anytime you see that, you are watching a reference to the end of this film.
Yes, that makes sense. Yeah, and kind of an homage to Coppola, I suppose.
And he deserves it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I felt like watching this movie was like being at an art museum or inside a painting sometimes. There was this level of this somber but almost sacred space that made me feel as I was watching it, which is so ironic in the same way that those cutback scenes we were just talking about, where you see all these awful things happening while the leader is mundanely, has their hands clean or whatever it is. But I felt like as the movie unfolded, and especially with the music and with these lovely landscapes, that it was telling me in this kind of subtext visual language, it's all right. You're in good hands, which was
nice.
so neat. I found the movie very calming. And I did not expect that.
Nothing like a bunch of mafiosos to make you feel like you're in good hands.
It was so, I was like, this is beautiful irony. I loved that.
Yeah, I love that too. I mean, that's so interesting. So now I'm just really curious, like how much of that is the film itself and how much of that is like a sense, what is it, 72? How many years later are we? We're many years later.
Many years later. Mm-hmm.
Many years later.
Yes.
That you are 46 years later. I can do math sometimes.
Almost 50 years later. Wow.
Almost 50 years later.
Wow.
So I'm curious, like, how much of that is the film itself and how much of it is this, like, the fact that it has become part of our cultural language.
Yes.
Which it's hard for me to imagine that someone like you watching it for the first time now doesn't feel kind of embraced by the history of how stories are told cinematically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I actually don't know, like, what are the other big Francis Ford Coppola films? Do you know off the top of your head?
Yeah.
I'm not good at this anyway, at like remembering the directors, so I'm wondering if I can kind of see that artistic thread. You're laughing so hard.
Wow,
I'm so
I am
curious.
So amused with myself. I should be able to just rattle those off, and I can't because for some reason all I can think about right now is the Dracula.
Bram Stoker's Dracula with Gary Oldman?
Yep, that's Coppola.
I can totally see that. Now, I haven't seen that movie in ages, but it's got that same kind of slow, very artistic and careful. And I mean, they are slow films, I have to say.
Yes.
I don't mind that at all. I know that some people do.
Well, again, I think that part of that is also a cultural thing. Like, we have come to expect certain things from our visual language in films. Like, the example that I love is when you see Sonny come and beat up his brother-in-law.
Yes.
Right?
The first time out in the street when the kids are playing?
The first time, right. So, and they're like out in the street and you're watching it from a distance.
Yes.
And it doesn't seem that, like, badass, right?
Yeah.
Because we're not having that kind of cutting where it's like close in and you're like watching punches happen. You're watching it
blood
all
spray and
right. Yeah. You're watching it the way it would be if you were standing on a street corner and some dude came and started beating up another dude. And it's just like, that's actually what it would look like. It doesn't look like the way we're used to it looking like in a film where you get in close and you see the punches hit and you see, you're just seeing it from a distance, which, again, there were movies back then that did do that other stuff, but it was just like, that was just much more. There was just less cutting. Like, did you ever see The Player? Did you ever see that movie? Like, there's this like beautiful, I forget what that's called. Like, there's this beautiful, the beginning of the movie, The Player, where you do this incredibly long shot where they like go in and out and do all this stuff, and they keep talking. And it's filmmakers in the film, so they're all talking about making shots like that. I haven't seen it in a really long time, so I'm not describing this very well. But the characters are actually talking about long shots like that, and I'm totally forgetting what it's called.
Oh, that's so smart.
Versus where you like cut and cut and cut and cut, and that's part of the thing. It's like no one would make a scene like that anymore. No one would make a fight scene that looks like that now.
Yeah, I guess so.
Because we are trained to see that as not impactful, not menacing, not...
It didn't occur to me at the time. I mean, I still thought it was pretty badass. and deserved. So I felt pretty good about it. But I do definitely see what you're saying. It's not as
it's not as visceral.
Yes. Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, I was going to say impactful, but that seemed too on the nose with like beating up.
Oh, right. Oh, my goodness. Apocalypse Now. I should have been able to do this off. Wow.
Yeah. No, never seen Apocalypse Now.
Also with Marlon Brando.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. I'm just trying to there's a lot of Francis Ford Coppola movies.
No, I know that there are.
Right. American Graffiti. Well, American Graffiti, I think, was his first.
I have also not seen American Graffiti.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. No, this is why I talked about like watching the AFI Top 100 films and stuff, because I have, there is a dearth of movies that I have just gone unseen by me somehow. But I don't actually watch a lot of media. And generally, if I'm not podcasting on something, I'm not necessarily watching either.
Oh, The Outsiders, which you have seen, right?
Yes. Okay, The Outsiders I have seen. Definitely so. Well, that was my favorite book growing up for such a long time.
I've never read that book. I know.
That would be an interesting one to do. Yeah.
That would be a very interesting. Okay, we'll have to put that in our pockets for later.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Definitely so.
Okay, so before we start really talking about it, let's address the fact that we generally pick stories that are very women-centered, or at least have
yes,
good depictions or interesting depictions or meaty depictions of women. And let's just say up front, this is not that.
This is not that. Yeah, this is not that. I think it's I think it's a great reason that we're talking about the film, though, because it's always been known kind of as a guy's movie, but now that means something different to me. Like, the women in this movie are mostly like pawns or something for the men to act around, with the notable exception of Connie.
Yes.
I love Connie.
Right. Although Connie, I mean, it's interesting.
Oh, no, she has problems. Yes.
One of the things that we really dislike in storytelling is when bad things happen to women to motivate men.
Absolutely. Yes. And that's what I meant to say about being a pawn for the men to act around. Yes, absolutely.
Although the one interesting thing about Connie being a female character in that role is that actually almost gets called out by the movie.
Yes.
In a way. I mean, not in a feminist way, but it's like her beatings are used to motivate Sonny. Mm-hmm. And the movie, addressing that or recognizing that, actually ends up being part of the movie as well, which is interesting. Again, not feminist in any way.
Right.
Not, that doesn't make it okay. But it is kind of interesting. It's called
The Godfather. It's pretty goddamn patriarchal. It's just gonna be.
So yeah, this is where I should say, I'm going to bring this up a little bit. I happen to be watching Peaky Blinders right now,
which I don't even know what that is. You mentioned that earlier. I'm like, I don't know what Peaky Blinders is.
A lot of our Fathoms Deep listeners were tweeting at me all the time saying, "You must watch Peaky Blinders. You must watch Peaky." I love Peaky Blinders.
Really?
I love Peaky Blinders.
Well, that's great.
I mean, it's not perfect, but it's really great, and it is a mafia story set in England in the 1920s.
Fascinating.
And it's a crime family. It's a historical crime family of gypsies, of ethnic gypsies in Birmingham.
Really?
Yep. So it's
I
really
could give that a shot. I love the 20s time period. I've been watching a lot of Miss Fisher's Murder Mysteries lately. I've just gotten into season 3, which is not as good as 1 and 2. So I'm feeling like after this, I'm going to have to find another.
I think I recommend
period
Peaky Blinders. It's not perfect. It's not.
What is?
Right. Black Sails.
Black Sails.
But it's not perfect, but it's fascinating. And it's been really interesting for me. It's just the timing of us. I started watching it before you recommended we talk about The Godfather.
Oh, uh-huh.
It's really interesting for me in stuff that I'm going to say a little bit later about it, where they parallel, even though it's not an immigrant story exactly. So it's really interesting because this is an immigrant story.
Yes.
Peaky Blinders isn't. I mean, there are similarities. The structure of the brothers is very similar, which is what I was enjoying. I immediately was like, oh, look at that. We have a brother structure that's very much like the Corleones.
Sure.
And definitely hot-headed older brother.
Mm-hmm.
It's the middle brother who's the one who is the Michael Corleone of the family.
Ah.
And then the younger brother, he's not Fredo. I mean, thank goodness. Who would want to be Fredo?
Who would want to be Fredo? Yeah.
I know,
Indeed.
poor Fredo. But yeah, that was really interesting to me. But Peaky Blinders actually also has an aunt who is an integral part of the family.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Peaky Blinders is an interesting case where you have a mafia-like family where women are more important parts of it.
Sure. Yeah, none of the women had any kind of voice at all when it came to decision making or counsel or wisdom I mean, there was none of that.
No.
Though Connie was the only one that even had a personality at all. I
Right.
think the other ones you could just, pretty girl.
Right.
That's it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Kay, for me, has a place, and we'll get into this when we talk about what this means for me, like as an immigrant story, but Kay has an important place as a archetype.
Oh, okay.
But that doesn't make her characterization interesting.
Sure. Right. Yes.
what she symbolizes, again, which is the same. Like she exists to in service of the stories of the men.
Yes, certainly so.
Even if she's an interesting archetype.
We'll have to talk about that. Okay.
Yeah.
I believe you.
I believe in America. America has made my fortune. And I raised my daughter in the American fashion.
Tell me why is this movie such a big deal to you? Like, why? How did this one get on your radar? Is I guess what I want to ask. Like, why The Godfather?
Oh goodness, I don't know how it got on my radar because I don't even remember when I first watched it. Honestly,
Sure.
Wow, I have no idea. Like let's say it's always been on my radar as long as I can remember.
I guess a better word is, why is it on your love list?
Right. Why is it on my love list? I know, it's interesting. Like I think about this a lot. I never liked pirates my whole life until recently, but I've always loved mobsters. And
that's really similar in a lot of ways.
There are similarities, and we should get into that.
Yeah.
I have always loved Mafia stories. This one forever. Once Upon a Time in America. Also,
don't know that one either.
Love. That one's Jewish Mafia. Woohoo, Jewish Mafia.
Okay, very cool.
It's funny. I mean, I have mixed feelings about the Scorsese films. Like a lot of people like those ones better. And I love The Sopranos. And
I watched all of The Sopranos. It never did a goddamn thing for me.
I loved it very much.
I might be able to go back and really enjoy it. Should I say nothing? I mean, I like Tony. I like Tony and nobody else. Like, not anyone else.
Not Paulie? I love Paulie.
I don't even remember who Paulie is.
Okay, we don't
so
need to
I guess not.
We don't need to talk about The Sopranos, right?
That's okay. This was seriously 13 years ago, though.
Right.
So, yeah.
It took me a long time to understand what I think is speaking to me so much. And then like this, I think I told you just, after we had been podcasting about Black Sails one day and I brought it up and you were like, I haven't seen it. And I went into my whole theory about how, for me, Mafia stories are to some extent allegories for that period of immigration. Not this period, but I'm saying like the immigration.
Yeah, what do you mean?
Right.
What period of immigration?
I mean the groups that immigrated to the United States in the early 1900s, like late 1800s, early 1900s,
Gotcha.
which is when a lot of Italians and a lot of Jews immigrated to the United States.
Course.
Like this was like the big, all those pictures you see of Ellis Island with the long lines of people and stuff.
Yeah.
That was that. And it's interesting. I mean, it's a different discussion that could be hours long itself, like how much that relates to later groups of immigration. That period of immigration was interesting because it was immigration of Europeans.
Mm-hmm.
So it was immigration of groups of people who are now part of the mainstream.
I was going to say, yeah, it's hard for me to even
Right.
go.
But there was
it's such a normal part of our culture now, it feels like. Yeah.
Right. That was back then. There were strong delineations between the white to the European Americans, white people who were there already, and these groups. And
That's right. I forget about how hard that racism was for so long.
Exactly. And so it was like, it was a really interesting thing to look at it's hard to frame exactly now because immigration is in large part people of color, and the racism is against people of color. And these groups have completely sided, now identify completely as white and have all of the privileges of being white. But back then they did not. Mm-hmm. So like even in the times, when my grandparents, who neither of my grandparents were both born in the United States, but their parents, my family's weird. It's like I'm second generation and third and fourth generation in the US. But even, like in this time in the 40s, there were still like job application, like you would see job ads in the newspaper and they would say Protestant. And that was a way to make sure that Jews and Italians and Catholic Germans and Irish people who all were part of that large immigration were kept out of housing and jobs and things like that. So I know it's really hard to like imagine that now, but those groups of people at the time, again, it was a time, there were people of color in this country and they were experiencing a different sort of racism. And I'm not going to like start saying that this is like what people who had been enslaved were experiencing. But what is relevant to this genre is that those groups of people, even though they were white, were actually excluded in some ways and were outsiders.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially with this family being such a big word.
Right.
In The Godfather. Like, family includes so many people. And it was so interesting having Tom Hagen brought in.
Right, who was German Irish. So that made sense because they would have been in the same neighborhoods. Like they would have actually. So yeah, there are other mafia films that like do a really good job of showing like how actually Italian mafias and Jewish mafia and Irish mafia like all interacted with each other.
Sure.
Because each group actually had their own variations on this. And I should pause to say, like, this is a series, there are people who are very upset that the mafia had become and continues to be like a primary way that Italian Americans are represented. And that is a totally legitimate. Actually, when I was reading a little bit about the history of this, because I always felt like I knew the history of it, but I was like, okay, I should just like check a little bit. It's very interesting. They never say mafia in this movie and that was a concession to the Italian American anti-defamation groups that were upset about it. This movie is made loosely from a book by Mario Puzo called The Godfather, in which he does use that term, and that was a choice that they chose not to use that term. And actually Godfather is not a traditional terminology. That is one that was adopted for this storytelling.
Wow. Okay.
It's that part's really interesting. Yeah, there's like a bit of an interest, like I was going to ask
about that, like if it was done carefully and tactfully and progressively for the time, which it sounds like, again, for the time. No, not so much.
I don't know. Well,
it's because to me it felt, and it's hard to say because again, this is one of the earliest movies that did the whole like immigrant story and the mafia story and the Italian American story, and so to me it sometimes feels really like tropey and just like
it created the trope.
It created the tropes. All right. I just don't like. Sometimes it felt like this. This feels a little politically incorrect sometimes, and I wasn't sure if it was progressive for the time or if that's, where the trope comes from, and therefore all Italian immigrants must be just like the Godfather? Is that what you're saying kind of happened?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Dear.
It kind of happened. I mean, it's interesting. So yeah, I read a tiny bit. Again, this is Wikipedia, so I don't know if it's all of it's true. But so there's the Mario Puzo book, which was a huge hit, and the studio, which I didn't write down, the studio that did it actually very specifically wanted an Italian American director for the sake of authenticity. Like they wanted it to feel super Italian.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Like they didn't want Al Pacino, who was then unknown, and Francis Ford Coppola fought for him because it said in Wikipedia that he wanted specifically someone who he could imagine in the portion of the story in Italy, like as a guy who would blend in and look like some guy who would be walking around the countryside in Italy. I mean, in addition to him being a phenomenal actor. But
I did not recognize Al Pacino until an embarrassing amount of time into the film.
Yeah.
It was
so
a while.
in this.
He's lovely and so young. Yes. I had pulled up kind of the cast list in general because people kept popping up. I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God.
But they're all so young.
That was when I realized it was Al Pacino, and it just kind of blew my mind because I really actually knew basically nothing about this movie going in.
That's so amazing. That's so amazing.
I don't know how I was basically unspoiled, but I had no idea what to expect.
I can't speak to, because I am Jewish and not Italian. I cannot speak to how much of it is, working on stereotypes and how much of it, feels authentic to an Italian American family in the 40s. But what I do like about it is how it does work with a lot of the things that immigrant groups of people, again, who have the ability to assimilate, deal with. So like assimilation is a real question here. And it's the first, like I wrote down, the first thing you hear is the undertaker who comes to the Godfather and doesn't call him that because he's a representative of someone who tried to assimilate. And he says, his first lines are, "I believe in America. America has made my fortune, and I raised my daughter in the American fashion." And so we already are set up with this idea that you can try to assimilate and that won't always work out.
Right. Yeah. It's a great opening because it does immediately like tug at your heartstrings, and it like opens up this empathy, this level of empathy where you're like, I want more justice for these people. And it's so interesting to see, because of course you've got this gorgeous wedding that's happening in the background, but Vito Corleone seems quite benevolent, especially right here in the beginning. Very patient, and I mean, certainly a benevolent tyrant, clearly, but also a king in a way.
Well, it is a very feudal looking situation here.
Very, very feudal. Yes. Yes, he is caring for his people. And Michael says that a couple times later. Like, my father is like any other powerful man who has men, what does it say, to look after or to care for, or he doesn't say like under him. He doesn't say underlings, but it's like people he feels morally in charge of their care.
They moved a feudalistic system into an environment where that doesn't exist. So yes, but there is hierarchy. The hierarchy exists. The hierarchy
by the way,
is strong.
Are totally my consigliere in my life. So thanks for that.
Awesome.
Cheers. Thank you, my Daphne.
So yeah, this is what's fascinating to me. So this is a thing that, again, I can't speak to Italians. This is a thing that is like a serious question for Jews that, do we assimilate and lose ourselves, or do we retain our cultural identity and not fit in? And this has always been an issue. This has always been an issue. And in Peaky Blinders, there's a little bit of that going on with gypsies. It's really fascinating. And I like that. And it just took me a long time to realize that that's what I was seeing in all these mafia stories.
Yeah. I don't know if I've told you this before. I feel like we've had this conversation, and maybe even on the podcast, where there was a time when I was in elementary school when I remember where they were talking about how America was a melting pot, but that people were going away from that, and they were trying to bring in this term and call it a tossed salad.
Right.
I have no idea whatever happened with that. I've still only hear melting pot. I've never heard America called a tossed salad. Yeah, I think it didn't stick. But I do love what that tries to represent, this idea of keeping your cultural identity.
Right. This is a beautiful depiction of showing how, again, it's a depiction in the framework of a crime family, but it's still a beautiful depiction of how, of the tension there. It's not, I don't think it's coming down on one side or the other of like saying this is what people should do, but it's illuminating the tension in a really beautiful way and using that tension to be the tension of Michael's personal existence.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I really, really, really love that. And then this brought me to like a different thing. I wanted to bring up a few more things that were like part of an immigrant experience. Like I love, it's kind of fascinating the structure that Vito tried to create, where it was like he did the stuff that he did and the older brothers would be part of that, but that Michael was supposed to be the one who entered the world of America. Like that he was supposed to be separate of this. He spells that out in the conversation that the conversation they have in the garden later on, once Michael has taken over, where he says, I was always doing my best when other people were pulling the strings, and I wanted you to be the one pulling those strings.
Yeah, and to be a governor or a senator, or
right?
Something.
Exactly,
right.
And that's also both part of most mafia stories, like the idea that like some shining gem in the next generation would be the one who would cross over and be part of the culture at large, be part of this, the place that they...
So interesting.
And this is an immigrant thing. I mean, this is an immigrant thing across the board. The idea that I will migrate to another country and work hard and suffer and not fit in, but I'm doing this for my children. So that they can go to university or they can do whatever and they can be American. But that also is one of the tensions within families, is the idea that the immigrant comes to America and is an outsider so that their children can be insiders. But then that becomes an essential rift in a way in the family itself.
Did you ever read The Joy Luck Club?
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
I remember
totally
that bit.
Totally
yes.
Yep.
Yes. That bit about like her daughter swallowed too much Coca-Cola to taste any sorrow or something like that.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's that same concept. Like and this is something like, again, this is something me as third and fourth generation have always grown up with, this sense, because my grandparents on the one side were actually from Poland. So I got that message as well, basically. It was like that we did what we did so that you all can just be normal Americans.
Wow.
But don't be too normal Americans, because...
Hang on to your heritage.
Right,
yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I very much grew up with exactly that. I don't want to call it mixed messages, like that complex message.
Yes. Complex,
because it always came with love. Like it always came from a place of love, but it's not without its own burdens.
Of course. Wow. That's really beautiful.
So I just really love that. So yeah, one of the other examples was that when Clemenza is teaching Michael, like prepping him for the assassination, there is that moment where he says, like, we were all proud of you that you were a war hero and all, your dad too. Yeah. Like that was his recognition, like that I'm training you to do this thing that you were never supposed to do. We all, like they as a unit, all were kind of existing for this future that Michael was supposed to basically, I mean, and I think in a lot of ways justify, like that all the stuff they did.
I was going to say, like, because you wonder how you walk away from an empire like that you've created. Like you don't just, one generation says, we're not going to do it this way anymore. I mean, that this is an entire society and way of life that they're creating. So there's something hopeful, but also really naive about that, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, if it's naive, it's a naivete that, generations and generations of people have had.
Yeah. No, I mean specifically like in a mob story. I don't mean just I don't mean just like, someone's great grandmother. I mean in this particular just epic scope of how we've changed the way that our people operate in America because they had to. But also like it creates in some ways, I wouldn't say that it creates bigger boundaries, but it certainly doesn't open any gates.
Well, it creates a situation where a son finds out that his father was shot because he sees it in a newspaper.
God.
Right? I mean, that's what for me is so meaningful about that. It was just like everyone...
No, break that down for me. What do you mean?
That everyone in the family was like right there when Vito was shot. And Michael was like walking out, except Michael. He and Kay were walking after like shopping, in a fancy department store. And he found out that his father had been shot because he saw it in a newspaper. Because he wasn't inside. He was, I mean, and this is where I get into the Kay as the archetype. Like Kay she's blonde, she's all American, she's from, wait, was it Connecticut or New Hampshire? He sent her back to New Hampshire. Like she is that shining beacon. She is, again, not promoting this as a way to do female characters. I'm just saying as an archetype in this story, which is Michael's story, that is what she represents. Like he starts out telling her these stories. I mean, it's interesting that he tells her the stories at the wedding. Like he's telling her about Luca, and he tells her about the time that his father said that he would make somebody, the band leader, an offer he couldn't refuse.
Yeah,
and he spells out what that means, and he said, but he says, that's my family, that's not me, because that's the role he was supposed to play. He was supposed to play the role of being the person who not necessarily doesn't marry an Italian, but who goes off and becomes part. I mean, if he wanted to be a senator, like probably would have been better for him to have a wife like Kay on his arm.
I was going to say, this is jumping ahead, but why do you think that he does choose to marry Kay? Is it to hang on to that hope of moving? You're rolling your eyes like maybe it's just bad filmmaking.
Yeah, but I don't love that part.
I don't love it.
I think that he does so that they can shut that door on her at the very end of the movie, honestly.
Which is gorgeous. Right. I mean, that beat works really, really well.
But that's why he comes back to her, and that's why she inexplicably gets into that car with him and decides to marry him.
It makes no sense.
Right.
Yeah,
it's
been like a year and a half or something like that.
No,
and they don't know each other at all.
For more than a year.
That's right. So it's been like, oh God, yeah. No, that made no sense story-wise.
I couldn't believe he said, every
and
time I'm always
so
shocked.
Simpering because of that. Oh, but Michael, you never called me. But let's get married. I'm like, what?
I'd be like, dude, you've been back for more than a year and you never called me.
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing you had to run away because of, family politics, but like, you've been back this long and you didn't call me? Like, yeah, no. I don't buy it. I don't buy Kay marrying him. And I don't buy,
except that she had no personality at all, so he like marries a box of vanilla pudding. Okay.
Kind of. I mean, that's what I'm saying. That's basic. Like, that is kind of my point, is like what she represents is like she's white bread.
White bread.
I mean, not that Italians don't eat white bread, but you know what I mean? Like, she's
I know what you
she's
mean.
Wonder
Bread. I know exactly what you mean. Yes, no, for sure. I am totally following. Yeah. Why, though? That's so weird. Okay.
Right. So, but yes, I think it's so that we can see, because she represents mainstream American culture. So when he's shutting that door on her, like, part of it is showing who he's become, right? That's part of his arc, to see who he's become. Mm-hmm. And part of it is him shutting the door on this dream that he had, or that they had for him. We don't even know if he had that dream. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, that's another thing to discuss, is like how much.
It's hard to say with Michael.
Right. Exactly.
And I suppose this is so different for you because you've seen the movie so many times now. But I was 3/4 of the way through this film, 2.5 hours in, and saying, "Who the hell is Michael Corleone?
Who the hell is Michael Corleone?"
Yeah.
Right. That's a very good question. Like, who is he? Don't feel like as many times as you watch, like you can watch this over and over again and you won't know. And this goes to, a theme that I like of leaders and what they sacrifice to become that.
Yes. And I love that too. That always is very moving to me.
This is why it was such a big deal for me that in Elizabeth, they reference the end of The Godfather, because this is essentially what Queen Elizabeth, sorry for everyone who didn't go watch Elizabeth, go back and listen to our podcast about Elizabeth. But that's what she's doing as well. I mean, this whole idea of people who sacrifice themselves, they sacrifice themselves because of responsibility they feel towards other people. That's something that we often frame as a good trait. But is it?
Right. And does it necessarily make you a better leader? Like effective, yes, but better?
Right.
I don't
Exactly.
know. You have to turn off so much of your fundamental humanity when you do that.
Well, I think that's what The Godfather is telling you.
Yes. Ugh. Wow, that's good.
Yeah. I think that's exactly what The Godfather is telling you. And you know me, I love me a good tragic hero. I think Michael Corleone is one.
Sure. Okay, break down the hero part for me. Or do you just mean protagonist?
No, I don't just mean protagonist, because I think that Michael has all of the traits of a hero. He is caring. Let's talk about the hospital.
Yes.
Let's talk about the hospital.
This is when I started to love Michael, so I think that's good. Mm-hmm.
This is when, because you've already loved Vito, right? You already love Vito.
Yes,
almost
I love him immediately.
And you've heard the stories. Like, you hear Michael's story so early on, and you've already seen the horse head, right? You know what Vito is capable of.
Yeah, at this point, it's true. Although, again, kind of in this behind the scenes, man behind the curtain sort of way. But yes. Well, I think in the beginning, the opening sequence with Vito is so gorgeous because, again, he seems so benevolent.
And he's not benevolent. That's
no,
the thing.
And he's not unjust. Like, he's... okay. It's hard to say. He has very specific views on justice. He is not vindictive or revengeful in the same way that Sonny is, for example.
Right, exactly. And this is part of why Michael is a hero, is because you have Sonny basically to show you that Michael is a hero. He has heroic qualities.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, because the Undertaker was asking that he kill those two men that had raped his daughter, and Vito says that is not justice. Your daughter is still alive. We're not murderers. So at the time,
well, again, this comes into another one of the tropes about mafia stories, and they don't ever say this. Other mafia stories say this. Peaky Blinder definitely says this. In other mafia stories, the idea of civilians versus soldiers, that this is a demarcation that isn't said explicitly in The Godfather, but it is an implicit part of their story. There are different rules basically for people within the structure of these families and the rest of people. This is part of also the rules. Like, this is what's fascinating. I feel like I love that The Godfather doesn't really go through the rules of the mafia, whereas other mafia stories really do go through the rules.
Interesting.
But yeah, this idea that, like, there are separate rules for people within, and this is where the whole "it's business, not personal" comes in.
Yes, which I love.
And it's an interesting, again, these are part of...
That's another thing that was from, I think... Sorry.
No, that shows up everywhere.
Yes, I was going to say, but that's the big thing that I think started the whole reference with the "You've Got Mail" that I talked about, was the whole it's business, not personal. Sure. Because she gets this great thing where she's like, well, my business is personal to me. And I'm like, that's fair, though. Anyway.
Right. Well, and that's an interesting thing. God, I feel like we just like keep bringing up stuff and like bringing up stuff and bringing stuff. Like, that's an interesting thing within this. No, it's impossible not to, because there's so much going on in this movie. That's one of the interesting things also in this movie, is that this is said over and over again, and yet it is defined as a family. Like, outside of the boundaries of what is actually their biological family, it is defined as a family. Like, all of these different groups are defined as families. And every single bit of business almost happens during family life events, during a wedding, during a funeral. Like, the whole thing of identifying who was the traitor happened at Vito's funeral. At a baptism.
Right.
Like,
baptism.
It's such an interesting tension between the idea that something is business, not personal, and the fact that it's all so intertwined.
Yes, and so many meals. That's the thing I couldn't get over. And I was like, how are these people sitting down to these giant meals 30 minutes before they go and do a hit on somebody? Like, how are you not just like, I'll eat later? Insane.
Right.
I'm jealous of that, I have to say.
Yes, I enjoy that a lot. I enjoy that. And again, that also became part of the way we tell mafia stories.
I suppose so. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like the whole, basically, the whole food pornography. Like, actually, one of my favorite references in The Sopranos is that when they go to the mattresses, when they're all like holed up together, you have the moment where Clemenza is like making pasta and says the thing about like, someday you'll have to learn how to make food for 20 men. Yeah. That in The Sopranos, when they're in prison, they are totally referencing that. Like when they're making. No way. Yep.
That's amazing.
I love that.
That is great.
Yeah, so that's just like a thing where it's like these men know how to cook, partly because they have these moments where like there are no women, where they're just being soldiers together. They're being soldiers.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah, boiling coffee in the can or whatever it is. Sure. Wow. Yeah, and they do even a Chinese takeout at one point. I don't know if you noticed.
Yeah,
but that
totally. That's when they're waiting for the call. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Assume I've noticed.
Who am I talking to? That's hilarious.
I've seen the movie a lot of times. Yes, that's where they're waiting the confirmation of where the restaurant meat's going to be.
Yes. Yeah. Wow.
Yes. Sonny in his undershirt and his suspenders. I love it.
Yes. Oh, it's so good. It took me a moment too with the beginning of this movie figuring out the time period it was set in because of the wedding. Right. It put everybody in just kind of this really classic clothes that could have been, God, anywhere from 1930 to 1970, just about. And of course, because it got the big lapels. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, when is this movie? I had to see Cars before. I was like, oh, all right. And then that's when they brought in Michael in the uniform and everything. But it took me a second. Because a tux is a tux is a tux,
That's true. That's true. I didn't think about that. Although.
And think about the bridesmaids dresses. You could have seen those in 1984, right?
Yes,
I mean,
yes, you could have. They're pretty bad.
They're awful.
Yeah, they're
bad.
awful.
Yeah.
They're awful. Well, it's funny because there are some specific things. Is that what's his name? What is his name? The singer. Oh my God, I'm totally spacing on the singer's name.
Johnny Fantone. Johnny
Fontaine.
Fontaine. Fantone.
Yeah,
I was almost there.
I mean, there's never been confirmation of this, but he is
Dean Martin. No,
Sinatra.
No way.
Yep, who was reputed to have had. I mean, they all were reputed
well, they were
to
all
have
had contacts with the mob.
No, but
sure.
Sinatra specifically was.
I just don't think of Sinatra as being Italian. Was he Italian American?
Oh yeah, totally.
That is so weird that I wouldn't know that. I would know about Dean Martin. Well, of course, Dean Martin did some of the Italian songs too. So, and I don't think about Sinatra doing those. But wow, okay.
Well, and was it Tommy Dorsey? What was the big band that he was in? That's he was reputed to have. That the mob was reputed to have both gotten him out of that contract and gotten him movie deals again. Oh, again, this is all just like gossip and rumor. But yeah, this was
I want that story.
This was a serious like wink and a nod to people who believed those stories. I remember once I made that connection, like going, who was like, what made them choose to do that? But yeah, there are stories of like Frank Sinatra being like, yeah, fuck those people. So I don't know. This is all rumor and innuendo, but that is one of the like hints of which, because Michael's in a uniform, and I mean, I guess if you were better at identifying World War I versus World War II uniforms, that would be obvious which one.
No, I was that's about when it happened, is when he came in, because he was late to the wedding. Remember, so before that, we still got this movie takes a long time. That's like 10 or 15 minutes of movie where I'm like, when though? When?
Yeah. See, I honestly cannot remember a time when I didn't know what was going on in this movie.
Exactly. I'm sure. Well, and I think James Caan, who I didn't recognize also for a little while, his hair had that like between the hair and the lapels, like he could have walked onto the set of Saturday Night Live or Saturday Night Fever, excuse me, and I would have been like, yeah, sure, okay.
Oh, that's so funny.
It just took a sec.
That is so interesting.
And the older women, it doesn't matter because they can still be wearing a 20-year-old dress and to a wedding, and
that's so interesting. Right, I don't remember not knowing when what the time frame of this film was.
Yeah, took me a second. The Cars gave it away, and then somebody
Right.
said it's almost 1946, and I was like,
Right.
ah, okay.
Oh, now I know.
Now I know. Thank you, movie.
I
Thanks.
love that. I love that. What were we talking about? We were talking about mafia roles. Oh, so yeah, I would like to now bring this into things that are like thematic things that you and I both love. I've been thinking a lot lately about, again, for anyone who has not watched Black Sails and has not listened to Fathoms Deep, we spent a really long time talking about pirates, which are essentially a frontier story. We think of frontier stories being westerns, but pirates also were people who left in the nomenclature of Black Sails, left civilization. So I'll always just end up saying civilization. I think I'm just doomed to always call it civilization.
I think that's great shorthand.
Who left civilization to go to a place where they could, one, not be outcasts because they were outcasts for whatever reason from civilization, and then also to potentially build something new and different, which, is totally part of the Western genre as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting.
And always being outside of it, always outside of what they're building. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And it's interesting because I think in frontier stories, what happens is that they end up getting kind of reconsumed by civilization as part of those frontier stories. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the main differences with a mafia story, because a mafia story is obviously also a frontier of sorts, right?
Of sorts, right.
Because they're people who went somewhere, who actively went somewhere, left their frame of reference to go somewhere else, and who are outsiders and living by their own rules to some extent. But what's fascinating about a mafia story, and again, this is where me watching Peaky Blinders is so interesting, because it's a different context than the one I'm used to of it being immigrants to the United States. But it still has the same shape of, it's almost, in my eyes, it's almost like they're building mini frontiers that are almost like inside of bubbles within civilization.
Sure. Okay. All right. When you say it that way, it actually makes more sense to me, because I was going to start to question the frontier story thing. But
right. No, but
I told you you'd have to walk me through that part when we were talking earlier.
It's really interesting. Like, it's almost like, and again, they're not building walls. This is why I'm saying bubble.
Yeah,
like,
it is
building,
like a Boomtown almost, like a I don't know how you want to put that, but yes.
Well, but it's like an island within civilization. You see what I'm saying? Because it's like they're entering the civilization. They're entering the majority culture, but then they build their own little world within that, but it's porous. So it's like someone like Michael, like the dream is that someone like Michael would like somehow be kind of inside the bubble and outside the bubble at the same time. So it's very different than like pirates, who are like, we want to get away and we want everyone to leave us alone. They don't want civilization to leave them alone. They create this bubble in which they have their own rules and a bit and something like a mini frontier, but with the goal of actually assimilating. So that's why I keep thinking bubble, because it's like has a flexibility to it and also a porosity to it. So the idea would be that, that ultimately there would be some sort of flexibility between the two worlds.
Wow.
And I find that fascinating.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. Yeah, I wouldn't have broken down that theme that way. That's excellent.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is really 100%, because I never thought about them in those terms. You can just say criminals, right? That's one way you can look at it. But it's more than that, because it's about
different.
Culture.
Yeah, it is
right?
about culture, and it is about that like feudalistic society that you were talking about.
Exactly.
Like a society really is what we're talking about.
So but it's like, but what's interesting is it's not like other societies. It's not like. Did you ever watch Big Love? Like that's so like
a little bit.
So that was like groups of people, or we have this in real life, like groups of people who go and like create compounds and want to have nothing to do with the majority culture, right? That's one way of doing this. This is not that story. These are people who want to create their own
some
realm.
level of like osmosis in and out. Like the walls are
are porous.
Yes, the walls are porous. Sure, okay. That's fascinating. I like that very much.
Right. And their conflict, the conflict that is so fascinating, again, goes back to the, the essence of the immigrant experience to some extent, is that they want, on some level, they want that bubble to dissolve eventually. But on some level, nothing terrifies them more.
Mm-hmm.
And also, we have the reality of the Undertaker in the beginning, that even when you dissolve those walls, that doesn't mean you become part of the mainstream. You're still an outsider.
Oh, yeah, which is tragic.
Right.
Wow.
I mean, again, we know from history, like generations later, you do become part of the mainstream. But in the reality that they're existing in, within the lifetimes of themselves and their immediate family, there is so much danger in dissolving those porous bubble walls or whatever we're going to call them.
Sure.
And I just think that is so interesting. And then I feel like one way to read Michael, there's kind of many ways to read Michael's story, and one of them is like that he's the embodiment of that. Because he tries to, dissolve a little doorway for himself, but then his internal, and we said ages ago we were going to talk about the hospital. We still haven't gotten there, but like now we have to talk about the hospital. Now we have to talk about the hospital. That like that aspects of who he is, his essential self, like which is part both things, right? They said he went to an Ivy League school. Like part of his essential self is this assimilation, but also part of his essential self is this utter and complete loyalty to family. Right. And so
I love that line that he has to Vito there in the hospital where he says, "I'm with you, Pop. I'm with you now."
Right. So, and that also, like, that line is amazing. Like, I love everything about that. I love everything about, like, you see basically Michael in transformation in that segment, in that segment of the, because he walks in, he's so insecure, like he's just going to visit his dad.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he has the instinct. He is his father's son. Like, he immediately understands that everything is wrong about the situation.
Yeah. Yeah. I liked that very much. That first time that we see him taking charge.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how the nurse falls in line. Like, when people, I think, are natural born leaders, people fall in line. And that was really interesting to watch right then.
So, but this gets now to what I was saying about Michael as a hero. Like, Sonny would not have talked to her like that.
No.
Michael
that's a really great point,
spoke to her with such respect and such vulnerability. Like, she was really resisting
her. Yes, but he brought out her empathy and her compassion and her humanity instead of bringing out his own brutality in the way that Sonny would have done.
Exactly.
That's a really great point, Daphne.
And this is why I'm saying, this is why for me he's a tragic hero, is that he has all of the traits that in a different situation would have made him a heroic figure. And even what leads to his downfall are traits of a heroic figure. It is loyalty and responsibility that leads to his downfall.
Huh. I remember realizing that big turning point in watching the film from just like an interesting kind of outsider perspective, when I feel like that moment where you feel like you come into the porous wall a little bit and suddenly like you're part of this family, is when he goes to the restroom at the restaurant and you're like, God damn it, if that gun's not there, so I'm gonna lose my mind. It's gotta be there. It's gotta be there, right?
Absolutely. And and they did it so beautifully, because you are so afraid.
Yes. Yeah.
I know.
I'm like, still afraid. Look at me rooting for this mobster.
All of these watches, I am still afraid every single time he goes into that bathroom.
Well, and I think that is Al Pacino's best work in the film, is that scene right there. Because that combination of keeping the cool exterior, but you can see how nervous he is beautiful.
It's so gorgeous.
Because it wouldn't work. He's so cool and calm through so much of the movie. Like, it's one of my notes. It's like, he's just so cool. But we need him to also be human.
Right.
And his nerves in this scene really make the character work for me in a way that it wouldn't if he was super chill and laid back about it.
Right. Well, and also in the hospital, like, he's so emotional about his father. Sure. And I love that the "I'm with you now" can be read in different ways. Like Vito does not read it as like, one way to read it is like, that's it, I'm part of the family now. Like I'm coming back in. I'm back into being part of the family. That is, we know that Vito didn't read it that way because later on Vito talks about how this is not what he wanted for Michael. But when you see Vito smile and cry, you could read it either way, of Vito saying, thank God my smart son is actually going to help me now, or I'm just so happy that my beloved son is here.
Yeah, I just saw it as just that simple comfort of, I am not alone. Like he was alone in that room once they sent everybody away. He must have known that they were coming. He knew what that meant. He's a very smart man. Like as soon as the cops sent everybody away, he's okay, this is it. Like the next person that comes in that door is my death sentence. And it's his son who says, I'm with you now. I think
so tender with him.
Yeah, it was really beautiful.
And also, in addition to the way he spoke to the nurse, which I found so moving, every time I find so moving, how he talks to the baker who comes and you think
Enzo, who comes in.
Right, yes, you're so sure that that's the assassin, and then it's Enzo. Yeah. And then you have the thing where Michael, again, he's so smart, he's so fast on his feet. Like this is just, it's so scrappy. I love the scrappiness of it. Is like two guys without guns manage to scare off a car full of assassins. And then you see Enzo so nervous he can't even barely pull his cigarette out. And
Michael lights it for him. That was
gorgeous. It's so comforting. He says, you did great. And he just like, and you're like, okay, this guy, I get it. Like that's the moment where for me, I'm always like, this man is a born leader. He's amazing.
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree.
And so that's why this is where I see, again, he's not Captain America. But as you know, Captain America, not so much my type of hero.
My type of hero for sure. But yes.
But he's not.
I actually watched Captain America today with my kids. It's like, I love him. He's the best.
I love him too. Yes, listeners, don't get me wrong. I love Cap. But for me, the hero that I love most is the hero who is being heroic in ways that aren't always recognizable and against all odds. And yes, I do like tragic heroes, so I do actually like their heroic traits to also be their downfall.
Cruel mistress.
I am. The next scene that I think is really the important moment about business and personal is when they're talking, when Michael decides to, like, basically takes over the meeting that he's not even really supposed to be in. And then he said, and he lays out the whole plan. And, like, Sonny's being all, like, disrespectful of everyone and all personal, right?
Yep.
And
but doesn't see it in himself. Yeah.
Right. And Tom's trying to be all business. Like, he had been given this ultimatum, and
not a wartime conciliary.
And he's not a wartime conciliary. But he's trying in his own way. I mean, I love Tom. We haven't talked much about Tom, but I love Tom.
Oh, yes. Yes. And Robert Duvall just pitch perfect, I think, which he just about always is.
I know. Yeah. Can we take a moment? Like, he when he hears that his father is dead and he's like almost crying. I don't think you see tears, but he's like absorbing that information that his father has just been killed and is still like managing. He's looking away the whole time while he's talking to the Turk or whatever, Salazzo. He's like, he's looking, he can't look at him, but he's still pulling himself together for the sake of the family.
Wow.
God, I love that. I love that moment. I mean, I love the whole performance, but that moment to me is just slays me every time. It's so beautiful. Wow. And so, so you have Tom trying to be like super practical. And then you have Michael, who's like, is all, like definitely business, not personal, but with empathy and smarts. I mean, just like he finds a third way. Like, he's just like, you've got Sonny like war, and you've got Tom like, let's make a deal. And then you've got Michael who's like, yeah, but
yes,
I think I actually have something that might be smarter, and let me now, like, even though I've not been part of the family this whole time, let me like start to bring up new ways we can use our contacts, or and whatever contacts, people on the payroll. Not trying to like make this seem like something more benevolent than it is, but
sure.
But I just love that. I love that he brings in the idea that they could utilize the newspapers in this, and then you see when he goes away, you see like it all playing itself
it all
out.
works.
Yep.
Yeah, just brilliant.
So yeah, but the price of all this, and this is where we need to talk about. I always forget how to pronounce her name. His wife, his Italian wife,
Apollonia.
Yeah, Apollonia. Thank you. Which I meant to like ponder how her name is like connected possibly to Apollo, but
Apollo, of course, but probably no time.
Right. Didn't do that. So somebody else, if you.
I cannot wait to hear you talk about this portion of the film with him in the old country because I do not get it.
Okay. Oh, right.
I do not get this part. So I think that might be part of it being the immigrant story that is a miss for me. That just because I don't, it's just not a part of my internal. It's not a part of my existence, I suppose.
Right.
So
right.
it doesn't resonate with me. I don't understand.
Oh, that's so interesting. Right. That makes sense to me. I mean, I honestly, just for listeners, I texted Liz when I was rewatching today going, oh, this part. And you were like, okay.
Do not get this part. Don't get Apollonia at all. Why are you here?
She's here so she can, to some extent, so that she can die to motivate him. But
thanks again.
Right.
Yes. Sure.
Thank you, Story, for having potentially awesome woman exist just so that she could die.
Was she potentially awesome? I felt like she was lovely, but childish and annoying and awful, frankly.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I mean, she doesn't have a lot of personality.
She doesn't.
We don't hear her speak really until the end, although she's pretty adorable with the whole, like, I'm going to drive you.
Yeah, okay, that part is cute. But before that, we have I already know how to speak English Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then we have but you promised. And she's just very whiny to me. Like, I don't.
Oh, interesting.
It doesn't do much
okay.
for me.
Okay. I mean, yeah, that's interesting. This might be me not requiring much of her because of my own internalized
it's possible.
Gender stuff. For me, this portion in Italy it's interesting because
it's lovely.
Right. Okay. I assumed that you would like the loveliness of it.
Sure. Right. Of course.
Mm-hmm. It is lovely. And I don't know. Maybe I also just really like seeing Al Pacino in like a cap and a vest walking around the Italian countryside.
I mean, yes.
There is that.
Yes, though.
He is beautiful in this.
Definitely
and I
beautiful.
Love that. I love that very much.
I tried to understand this portion. I did not understand why he married Apollonia.
That was just a love at first sight sort of situation.
It was love at first sight. That was what they were going for. Okay.
Yep, they were going for love at first sight. But I think that, again, this is, I will reiterate, not in favor of using female characters just to serve male stories. But she does that. I mean, I think that Michael needed to go through this experience with Italy, not necessarily getting married, but that became part of it, so that his wife could die, so that he would be like super committed to the cause. But I think that what was important here in Michael's story was because he had been the person who felt the responsibility to be the outsider and kind of renounce his heritage. It was so important that he could go to a village called Corleone. Like, it was so, this is part.
Oh, of course.
And this is, in immigration stories of that time, not of the 40s, but of when his family arrived. Like, this was part of the thing, is like last names. My last name is not my family's last name. Like, we all got Ellis Island last names, and a lot of people ended up with like last names of where they were from, or random things, because that was the name that was assigned to them. Because they were often asked questions and didn't understand the questions. So you'd be like, who, what's your name? I'm from Corleone. I don't know if that's the story. I don't know how it worked for Italian Americans, but the idea of like the going back to the source of where you're from, the fact that Michael, when he was doing the assassination, actually had to switch to English when Salazzo was speaking to him in Italian, which I really loved that part of that scene, that Salazzo's like, we're just going to talk in Italian now and like leave this, this tool out of our conversation, because it's really about us, not about this stupid cop that I'm paying. And again, that's a like inside outside thing, right? Like he's like, let's retreat into our bubble because even though we're enemies, we're both within the same frontier bubble. So now we're going to speak Italian, which is how we assert that. But Michael couldn't do it. He had to switch to English. Like he says, how do you say? And then he's like, okay, I'm just switching to English.
Yeah.
And so to watch him like be in the countryside and learn to speak, we don't watch him learning, but we see him speaking Italian. Like he had learned to like, he had, and this is also like a lot of kids who didn't like grow up fluent in the language of their parents. Like the minute they get to that place, they're just like, okay, now I'm just like speaking this language because it's all in there. I just didn't know how to access it properly. And so being thrown in makes that all fall into place.
I love so much that you teach your daughter Hebrew, by the way. I just think that's the coolest thing. That is so cool.
Well, and that's part of her experience is like, it's not enough that she has that as part of our household. It's when we go to Israel, like that's when we watch her, like she'll just make leaps and bounds each time.
Of course.
In her Hebrew speaking because she's like suddenly immersed and the other kids don't speak English. So she just like jumps in and it's all there. It's all there just waiting for her to access it.
In the reserves, sure.
So there's that part of it like that's really beautiful. I mean, I guess it's just there's just a lot of beauty for me in this portion. And also what's interesting about the marriage is like we saw him, with Kay, who was like someone his family hadn't even met, but he like was dating her enough to like bring her to a wedding and they didn't know him.
And want her in the family picture.
Right. But then we see like him like step up to the traditions of courtship, which, in addition to just being totally amusing, like I will forever love.
I was going to say, I found that scene amusing, but also didn't quite understand it thematically.
Well, but this is him immersing himself in the culture that his family came from. Like, this is how it's done. This is how you speak to the father about courting his daughter, and you do this with a million chaperones. And, and I mean that's what I love. I mean it's amusing when you see the two of them walking, then you see all the other people, but it's also playing on American expectations that like these two are walking in the countryside, but no, that's not how it's done. You would walk in the countryside with the whole family trailing behind you.
It's so weird.
Because and they barely speak to each other because he's like talking to the dad, but that moment where she puts her hand on the necklace and they smile at each other, like that is courtship. That's one stage. Like later on they do the walk, you know what I mean? But it's just like, so what you're seeing there is you're seeing Michael basically like reconnected with the mothership. He's just like, this is where, my frontier bubble is all referencing this place I've never been.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. That makes more sense to me. I remember, because I was wondering at first if the marriage to Apollonia was somehow business, not personal. But I guess it was the opposite.
No,
personal, not business.
Completely personal.
All right, so that changes that for me.
Right, and her murder also was not, she was not supposed to die. Remember, his bodyguard said, are you going by yourself? Is your wife going with you? Like, she was not supposed to be in that car. She's a civilian.
Oh, yeah. Interesting point. Yes, okay. The other part that threw me off was that when they actually had the wedding and they were marching through the town, which was beautiful, the music was oddly funereal.
Well, I can't speak to Sicilian music. See, now we have to. Have you ever heard of the movie Time of the Gypsies, which is also one of my all-time favorite movies?
No,
sorry, that's Gypsies.
Time of the Gypsies.
Yeah,
okay.
That's
no. I just know that in the opening we have the wedding of Connie's, which considering how bad that marriage goes, seems like such a joyful occasion. Like it's so joyous,
right?
And the singing, the older people singing together.
My God, I love that.
God, it's
I know.
adorable. Cute.
I need someone to translate that song to me because whatever that guy's doing, it's definitely sexual, and
it's definitely sexual and hysterical.
I love old man doing like random sexual songs so much. That's my favorite thing. It's my favorite thing.
Yeah, but it just stood in such stark contrast to that. Like it did not seem nearly as joyous or as I don't know.
I have no knowledge to go with that.
The tone was so different that I just wasn't sure. I was like, what are we doing? What are we saying here?
Well, again,
but you're really helping me with that. So
again, this is all part of Michael's descent to some extent. I mean, it's like he's re-embracing his culture, but this is all part of his descent into being the person who has everyone call him Don at the end and closing that door. These are all stages in his fall.
Wow.
And for me, this is what makes a great tragic hero's story, is that it's not, nothing is a straight line like, oh, it's obvious this guy is going to fall. Like every single step of his fall always has this sense of like, this could be cool. Oh, wait.
Yeah.
And I will forever love that. Like that is, again, it's very human. I'm not saying everyone is a tragic hero and everyone's going to fall, but it's just like, we so rarely have moments of pure joy that don't have sadness.
Yeah.
That's part of humanity. And if we did just have joy, like, it's that whole thing of like, you would never know it's summer if you didn't have winter. Like, it's just like, if we only ever,
that
it's like
bittersweet that you love so much.
It's like in Inside Out, when she starts to learn how to mix joy and sadness, that's when, the feelings become deeper. It's just like melancholy is the human state. People love to reject sadness. But, my wedding was a joyous day, but I was very aware of the people who weren't there because they had died. And that didn't make it less special or less joyous. It's just human. Like this is how we work, or at least how I work. So I don't know. Maybe I like tragic heroes because that's just how my brain works. But I think that there is something, essential. Like we're mortal. We're going to die. Like the bad things happen and we die. Sorry to bring that up, everyone, but it's true. Yeah. And that's part of the human condition, and everything we experience has other things going on. And sometimes we have sad moments that like have humor, right? That's the flip side.
Of course. Yeah. Right? I remember in high school doing this play where it was it's a Holocaust play, so it's just so dark. And it had, I think, 2 good laugh lines in the whole thing, and my director was like, we're gonna cut them for time, and I was like, you can't do that. Right. No, we need it so badly to feel the full spectrum of emotion. I think you have to have the other swing, right? Because if you don't have that full swing, it becomes kind of like a numbed area.
Exactly.
Almost,
that's what it is, and that can happen on the happy side as well, is what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
Is that you just have happy,
and it becomes normal,
right?
Yeah. Which is not happy. It's just
and not
average.
human. Yeah. Like that's just, we have disappointments on a daily level in small ways and in a larger ways. So for me, stories are more meaningful when they manage to, in a complex and interesting way, combine all of those things together.
Yeah, sure.
And so for me, this stage in Italy, it's like partly you could be like, he's under the threat of death. Like he says to her father, like, that is information that people would pay a lot of money for. We know that he's, he didn't choose to be here. He's walking around with dudes with like a lot of ammunition on their bodies and, and stuff like that. But you could just be like, yay, I'm in the motherland and, or fatherland. I don't know what they call it in Italy, but, like, I am in my home place, and that's so cool because I was always an outsider, and now I'm kind of an insider. Although you have that cool moment. Like, I love the moment where they're on the road and the American GIs drive by.
Yes.
Right? And like, I love that. It's so beautiful because like he was them. He was exactly them.
Yeah.
But now,
God, that's right. Like exactly them.
Exactly them. But now he's like in the vest and the cap walking with those guys. Yeah. And they're like even joking the way foreigners would joke to, not foreigners, people would joke to American GIs when the American GIs are in their country.
Sure.
Like bringing up like random movie stars and stuff like that. And he's not participating in that because that would be absurd. But like for those American GIs.
But he's on the other side. Yeah.
But he always is.
Yes.
This is,
Oh my God. He's always on the other side.
This
Yes.
is the nature of immigrants.
That's the immigration story. Okay. Yeah. Wow. So they're always othered.
Always othered. He is always other.
Oh God. Okay.
Again, which is not an excuse for killing people and being
not
a crime,
an excuse,
crime godfather, but it's just this becomes.
But it makes the creation of a society where you belong just necessary on a fundamental human level for for having a place and knowing a place.
Again, and there are much more beneficial ways to do that than being a mafia,
than a crime syndicate.
Right.
Sure, absolutely.
But this is again, like most storytelling, very basic human realities in a heightened situation bring us to those emotions better.
Wow. That's gorgeous. I like that very much.
Me too.
Yeah. Wow.
Now you're understanding why I love Mafia
now I'm
stories.
understanding. No, I told you that I was going to have a lot of questions for you.
Yeah, I love it. This is so great.
Yeah.
No, this is great because it's like partly it's been questions I've asked myself because it's like, partly I'm just like, what is it with me and like murderous people?
Sure. Fair.
As a pretty upstanding citizen who would never hurt a fly, why do I like these characters so much?
Yeah.
But part of it is that I feel like they work very well. I mean, it's the same reason why do we like, why do I like Greek gods? Why do I like mythology? Like, I don't identify with them either, but they just become really great vehicles for telling stories.
Yeah.
That
absolutely.
have emotional truth to mere mortals like us.
Mm. Okay, so bringing us into the last third of the movie when he gets back to America, we lose... Well, I don't know. I have a couple of questions here because I guess Vito is against getting into the drug trade.
Right.
Which
we haven't talked about that at all.
That's okay. But it does fundamentally change the nature of how the mafia worked, right? Like he called that, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
It changed not that they were ever upstanding exactly, it was crime syndicate, but there was more...
Well, again, there was always a code. There are codes.
Yeah, there was a code, I suppose.
Right.
Sure.
Right. This would bring, and remember at the big meeting with the families, the one guy was like, okay, but we won't sell it by schools and we won't sell it to children.
Right.
It's just like,
I don't want to actually, yeah.
Right. And they're all existing under this pressure of this wave, basically. I mean, that's how I see it, is like this thing that's like standing there and is going to happen. I think they all know.
It's true.
They all know that this is going to become, again, they discuss this when they're discussing the meetings. Like they're discussing how, if the other families do this, then they will be so much more wealthy and that will give them leverage. And then they'll be, that would be
right,
the
they
death.
can't not do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, I mean, again, Michael, chooses a third way. Like, he chooses to go to Las Vegas instead.
This part of the movie starts to get the political parts get complicated for me, which I know is something that you really, that you always really love. And for me, I start to lose track of some of the threads.
Right.
So, so Vito doesn't want to get in on the drug trade, but then he says that it does become the only way. Like he has to lose everything,
right,
or find some kind of compromise.
Right.
So, so he does offer the protection of the East Side, and then after his passing, which was a lovely sequence.
Oh
also.
God, isn't that so beautiful?
It's a lovely sequence.
I know.
Yeah, and also the sequence when he and Michael are talking just before then.
Yes.
And he tells him how he'll be assassinated.
Yes.
And again, it's so calm.
Right.
Over a glass of wine in the garden.
Yep.
Just gorgeous.
I know. This is so always love. I mean, I love when smart people are being smart and like the serious competency and all of that. Like the just there's so much of this in here. Yeah, there was the point that when Clemenza was explaining about the gun, I was like, this is mafia theater. Like this is right. Like drop the gun, which Michael doesn't do any of it right.
No, he doesn't do any of it right. So cute.
But yeah, this is one of the things I love as part of mafia stories, like just how smart everyone is.
Yeah.
I mean, except the ones who aren't, like Sonny.
Well, help me then to understand Michael's decision to kill the heads of all the other families and to not do things as his father was doing.
So again, it's hard to. I think it's hard to know, because Vito, places Michael at the head of the family. Like, I also love that scene where in the beginning, Michael, when they're in the office, in the beginning, Michael is sitting in the side chair, and right, and everyone keeps talking to Vito. And then he keeps saying, talk to Michael. And by the end of the scene, Michael is circled around and is sitting at the desk. That is a gorgeous scene. That is just so beautifully constructed.
Wonderful sequence. Yeah.
So, I love that. And again, up until when Vito dies, you should assume that everything Michael's doing is with Vito's endorsement because he's essentially being consigliere at that point.
Right.
I think it's fascinating the way he sidelines Tom. And again, I think, this is a question for you. Like, when he says, Tom, you're out, like, did you worry that he was worried that Tom would betray him?
No.
Okay. All right. I don't remember.
No, I did see it as just business and not personal.
Right.
You are not a wartime consigliere.
Yeah.
You are not giving me the advice that I actually need right now. Also, I've got my father to do that, who he does seem to trust very much.
I just always feel so bad for Tom right there.
I feel bad for Tom, but I love the way the two of them, that Vito and Michael, understand now how the roles have switched. And Michael just stays the badass, no, my word is law.
Right.
And Vito goes over and does the consoling.
Right.
Because it would have been the opposite before.
Yep.
If Vito was still the Don, then somebody else would have to console him, and whatever, my word is law, away with you, peasant. But they do that trade-off, and there's that moment's hesitation where Vito's like, hey, you're being hard on, oh no, okay, all right. And you see him kind of take that second and go and change the way that he talks to Tom. Right.
Well, and that's the thing. I love that whole hierarchy thing that, like, remember when they were talking to Salazzo the first time, and Sonny starts to say stuff, and then Vito's like,
don't ever,
Well, and basically Vito gets shot because of it. I mean, he's totally right. Vito basically gets shot because Sonny said something, because Salazzo...
I hadn't put that together,
because
but you're
Salazzo's
right.
like, I can tell. Sonny, like, he says to Tom when he's talking to him, when he says that Vito's been shot, he's like, I can tell Sonny wants to side with me.
Yeah.
Right? And then you have
shit.
And then you have that moment in Las Vegas where Michael says to Fredo, like, never side with anyone outside of the family.
That's right.
Right?
That makes that so much more sense. Okay. Yeah. I had
there's
to put those
all
two
these
things
little
together.
Wonderful things. Like,
I was going to say, there are so many threads. I assume you have to watch this movie a dozen times
so
to get
many
all
beautiful
of those.
things. Like, I love that Vito talks about drinking more wine, because you almost never see him with wine. The only time I think that you see him with wine before that is at the wedding, and he never drinks it. Like, someone hands him wine when he's done with his business and he comes out to be with his family. Someone hands him wine. He doesn't touch it. Like, he has to be sharp. He has to be sharp.
He has to be on top of things.
Right.
And he needs everybody else just a little loose,
right,
too.
Exactly. So and at the end, like, the fact that then you always see Vito with wine, and he even talks to Michael about it. Michael's like, it's okay, Dad. Like, that's it. You've done your thing. Like,
Right. And he keeps saying, I already took care of that, Dad. I already took care of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you see Vito with the wine in the last scene when he's playing with his grandson.
Yeah.
I do love that. Okay, but to your question, is Michael taking the family in a different... I mean, yeah, he probably is. I mean, I think it's the smart thing to do. I mean, it's possible, Salazzo said that Vito's slipping. It might be that Vito was slipping, that he wanted exactly to become the guy who would, like, put an orange peel in his mouth and goof around with his grandson, and that the king needed to die. Long live the king. Like, it was time for a new king. And because Michael did what he needed to do. Like, he didn't stay and fight like Sonny would have done. He realized that it was time to cut his losses and be nimble and, like, actually go in a different direction. And this is a thing. So this is where I could say, like, so Mo Green represents Bugsy Siegel, who was, like, there's a movie called Bugsy where he's
right. That's right.
That's about how Bugsy Siegel, like, basically created what is now Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. And he was bankrolled by the Italian mobsters. And I haven't seen that movie since it came out, so I'm not going to remember a lot of stuff about that story. But I love this, like, that they're taking this part of kind of the history and incorporating it into this family story. this completely fictional family story.
Right.
But I don't know. It's hard to say if Vito would do that. Like the only reference we get is the when they say like you all never used to talk about business at the table when Dad was here, but that was just when he was recuperating. I think that wasn't when he was dead.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I've just
I forgot about that.
Destroyed my reputation for like remembering everything, but I'm pretty sure that was just when he was out of commission, not dead.
Yeah.
So I've never felt like Michael like made decisions that were drastically different from what Vito was capable of. I think that this is for me more a sign of like Vito was just like was like at the end of his ability to be effective.
Sure.
And again, part of this might be informed by the second film. The second film,
I was wondering about that because it feels very much like
interesting
a prologue in certain ways. So that makes sense.
Second film, you get Vito's backstory, and Robert De Niro plays him. And this is part of this like long-standing joke between me and my husband because like Robert De Niro and Al Pacino played mafiosos and never, I think until, I'm forgetting the name of the movie. There's a movie where they play together when they're both like, middle-aged already. And I think that was the first time they ever actually
like interact.
We're in a scene together. Like they've been, it's like they live these parallel actor lives all these years and never.
That's so cool.
So yeah, Robert De Niro plays young Vito.
Wow. Well, that's interesting. That would be interesting to me. Okay.
Yeah, we might have to do that one too, huh? But so I don't know if I feel like what Michael's doing is a huge... I mean, obviously, you're right. Vito said, let's make peace. And
yeah.
But again, remember that Vito was advising Michael about who was going to be the traitor.
Yeah, and that he was going to be assassinated.
Right.
No. Well, and I was just thinking of when we have the scene where he's being prepared. Who was it that was preparing him to do the assassination of Sollozzo and
Clemenza. Isn't he wonderful?
Clemenza.
Don't you love him?
Okay. I do. But Clemenza said it, and it kind of like put me at ease about his decision making when Clemenza was like, you have to do this from time to time. You got to stir things up. It happens every 5 to 10 years. It's been about 10 years since the last one.
Yep.
And just kind of like, yeah, I'm with you, Michael. Right. Like I feel like this is a good idea. And then I was like, oh, okay, well then maybe it's all right. What do I know?
Well, again, soldiers, like again, they never say this. This is in other mafia stories. They actually refer to themselves as soldiers, but that is the mentality. And again, like, and that goes to another thing I just kind of love, just delights me in these stories is just like, it's horrible how blasé they could be about murder. But it's also really fun. Like, this is where the whole, like, leave the gun, take the cannoli comes in.
Sure.
There's just a part of me, like, that this is a mafia trope. Like, that you could, like, hang out with and just, like, joke around with someone all day when you know you're going to kill them at the end of the day.
Wow. Yes. By the way, I was super glad he killed Carlo. I was like, are you serious? You're letting Carlo off the hook? Oh, good. Thank God. You're going to kill the guy.
Well, and I what I love about it is that Carlo's the only one he needs a confession from. Because he's family. Oh. Every single one of them, they knew Carlo too. They knew they knew what every single person they killed had done.
Yeah. But
from Carlo, he needed the confession.
Wow. That's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't put that together.
Right? I mean, it's I know. What's his name? Who I also love. Oh, Tessio, right? With Tessio, the other guy, the other one, like that there was Sollozzo and Tessio, and he was like, they weren't sure which was going to be. So Tessio, who had also been a loyal person in their family. And Michael's like, he was just like, no hard feelings. Like this was the smart thing to do. Tessio is the smarter one. Like he wasn't surprised that it was Tessio and not Clemenza because Tessio's smarter.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. It's just like, there's just this kind of matter-of-factness about all of it, again, that goes down to this whole it's business, not personal. It's so interesting that they live in to some extent, an alternate reality from the one that we do when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah. Wow.
And one of my favorite things that Michael says is when Kay says, like, you're being naive, like your father, like, and he's like, tell me that presidents don't kill people. Like,
right. Now who's being naive? Yes.
Right.
Presidents and senators don't have people killed, Michael. Now he's being naive, Kay.
Exactly. And that's another, like, that's kind of not an immigrant question, but that's just like a society question. That's a really good one that I feel like Mafia stories always ask you.
Yeah. And, well, in Black Sails, too, that whole thing about, is civilization really
civilized,
kinder or more just? Is it civilized? Yeah.
Right.
Are they actually more civilized, or are they just normative, which is so different?
Are they just casting shadows on people like us who are outsiders?
Yes. Oh, so good. God, it's so good.
So that's how I see the ending. I mean, I think Michael was backed into a corner. I mean, there was, he made a good plan. He made a smart plan that was taking care of his family. And again, this is a story about loyalty and how loyalty can turn you into that guy.
Yeah. Wow.
That loyalty and the responsibility of care of others. I mean, sure, there's like some world in which Michael Corleone just decided like, hey, forget it. I'm going to go take all my money and move to Hawaii. But
in which case, I feel like he would have been a very boring guy. Like, he was boring in the first part of the movie. There was nothing going for him.
Yes.
So,
yes, he was. Yes, it would be a very bad story. And also, he has a lot of people who he's responsible for.
Yeah.
Again,
that's really fascinating.
Doesn't justify all the murder. Doesn't justify all the murder.
No, just explains. Does not excuse.
Right. It gives it context. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very good.
Yeah. So yeah, that's how I see it. And again, that last part, again, super smart. If you're at a baptism,
who can point the finger? Oh, do you renounce Satan and all of his works?
My God, it's so beautiful. It is
beautifully done.
So beautiful, the back and forth.
Beautifully done.
And again, gets referenced all the time. Maybe I have a soft spot for stories that reference that moment because I love it so much. But
it was great. Yeah.
But yes, Elizabeth totally does it. Black Sails totally does it.
Gorgeous.
Yep. And again, for similar reasons. I mean, this is, Elizabeth, I feel like, is very much a Michael Corleone story.
A very similar story. Absolutely it is. Yeah.
And what's interesting in Black Sails, I think this is not spoiling anything to say this, but the person who is the Michael Corleone in that reference in Black Sails is Eleanor, who I have always said this, again, for people who haven't watched Black Sails, this is not a spoiler to say this, but she is a mobster living in a pirate story.
Yeah. Wow, that's so good. Good pulls. All the threads are coming together for me. All these things. I'm glad that I finally watched this. So I'll get your references when they come back up. So and apparently everywhere else in media. Yes.
Yeah. No, it's shocking. I'm so curious now. Like, you'll have to report back. Like, I'm so curious now.
Whenever I see something.
Right.
Godfather moment.
Right. Yes. Well, because for me, it's almost like the air I breathe. It's just like I see these things and they make me happy, but it's just like I'm so used to them. I've seen so many references to the Godfather that I've seen and forgotten already.
Right, sure.
So I'm so curious how it is like seeing this as an adult for the first time and then seeing media afterwards.
Wow. Yeah, I'm interested too, actually. That's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, because it really is part of our cultural language, whether you've seen the movie or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's true.
That's so cool. All right, ready to move on to the third part and we'll talk about our favorite things?
Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
All right, Elizabeth, tell me your favorite thing about this gigantic, long movie.
I know, it's so hard. Okay, I'm going to kind of break it up. And one is going to be like a vague thing.
Okay.
And one's going to be a specific event.
Awesome. Okay, I will do the same then.
Okay, perfect. So vaguely, it's that thing that we talked about with those, like the kind of like ironic, dissonant cuts that we have where we see all the violence, but we have something mundane happening or even spiritual or family centered or sacred happening. And we have this lovely music and then all this violence underneath. So that was just beautifully done. But specifically, I love when Connie just loses her shit and starts breaking everything in that house.
Yeah.
Right before the terrible, awful beating happens. But it's the one time we see a woman take any kind of action at all.
Absolutely.
And for some reason, I find it really life-giving in that moment, especially I think because I personally keep my cool so much in conflict that something in me is just like, God, breaking stuff, though, that seems great.
Something in you needs a little bit of Italian.
Yes. Something just wants to, but I found that her just screaming in the outrage and injustice of something in a movie where everybody else was so cool and so calm and so collected is, I don't know, it stands out in my mind and was really lovely. And I guess the fact that the apartment looks so perfect, but everything in it was broken. Yeah. And she looks so perfect, but everything in the marriage was broken. And then she just makes it all what it really is. And it's so jarring with the rest of the movie being, like I said, being this idyllic, like being in a museum or being in a painting sometimes. And this really felt like the most honest moment in the movie in certain ways, as far as like seeing things for what they are.
She's great. She's terrific. She needed to have a better character written for her, and she did make the best of what she was given.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I still, every time she came on screen, I felt like things, it was like we turned up the color somehow. You know, we just got fabulous. More life. Yeah, she was fantastic.
She is fabulous. She really is. Okay, oh God, I don't have a favorite. I mean, the end. I've already, made that pretty clear. I have a lot of things I love in this movie. I love the hospital. I'm going to choose something just because we didn't talk about it, and it's actually the image that I am going to use as the header for this podcast episode. I do love the, it is so iconic. I love the leave the gun, take the cannoli. But what I really love about that scene is, after this whole day of going and talking about mattresses and joking around and all of this, that they go outside of New York. They go to some place it's just beautiful scenery. You have the grasses that are yellow, the very, very blue sky, and you see the Statue of Liberty in the distance when they're about to kill Paulie.
Yeah.
And I just feel like that encapsulates everything about this as an immigrant experience.
Wow.
Yeah. And they're just living by their own rules, like literally under the Statue of Liberty.
Yes.
And then you have the take the cannoli line, which is just so perfect. And you have the hierarchy also. You have the hierarchy that it's not actually Clemenza who does it. It's
right. He's like the overseer.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sure.
He goes out
manager on duty.
He goes to take a piss because he's higher in the hierarchy. And that Paulie, when he gets in the car, he's really nervous. Like he's looking back. He gets in the car and he's already looking back because he knows. I mean, we see this multiple times, right? That
was chilling too. When people knew that they were on a death march.
Yep.
That was chilling.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So Paulie knew, and like think about Paulie's situation. Like you spend the whole day just going.
God.
When he probably loosened up. Like then they're joking. Then they're he doesn't get strangled by the guy in the back seat.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So I just, that image for me is just very, very strong in a film full of just such strong images. But again, it's like also the closing the door at the end is just so haunting. It's just, it's just
that
like
was a gorgeous ending.
Like if you think about Hospital Michael and then you think about that Michael having his hands kissed and being called Don and just surrounded by men when Kay thought like, we didn't talk about the fact that he totally lied to her. Where he's like, Well,
and she was so ready to believe him, but it took seconds.
Right.
Like, you have to really want to believe somebody in that situation.
Yep.
But by the time they close that door, you know that she knows.
Well, and that's also, that's the beautiful thing about the contrast that his sister knows exactly who he is because she's part of the inside and Kay's part of the outside.
Yeah.
And then you see her, she's like, let's go get a drink. And then she sees that he doesn't follow her and you see it on her face. She's just like, ah, shit.
Yep. Yeah. That was actually the main reason that I wanted to see the second film, is to just see how that shakes out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I mean, I don't know if we need to podcast about it, but you definitely need to watch it.
But a main reason.
Yeah. It's. I mean, it is a second film. I don't know. I'm curious now. I don't know if Francis Ford Coppola. I mean, the third film comes, I think, way later.
Way later,
right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's really a second film in like an Empire Strikes Back sort of way. Like I don't know. I don't.
Well, it's only 2 years later too. I noticed that.
Yeah. Okay. I won't say anything else about it. It's really good.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'll watch it at some point.
Yay! It's also really long.
Okay, noted. Sure.
All right, so let's talk about what our plans are next. We are back on a podcasting schedule. Woohoo!
Thank you, 2018.
Yep. Hello, 2018. We are back and podcasting. So we decided. I don't even know who this qualifies as like the movie we love. We both just love this movie. Like
we both love this one. This isn't so introductory. This is just we want to talk about this.
Yeah. We're just going to have fun in 2 weeks and just talk about a movie we both love. And that movie is Strictly Ballroom by Baz Luhrmann.
Love Baz Luhrmann. And of course, this was the first of his that I watched. I was, maybe in high school, I think, when my mom introduced me to it. And it was so quirky. And I just remember thinking so often, why is this working?
I think
this shouldn't work.
Right. This is a really good question for Baz Luhrmann films in general. It's just like this shouldn't be making me so happy, and yet it is.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Delightful.
Yep.
Some really iconic scenes.
All right. So that's going to be really fun. I can't wait to watch it again. I owned his first 3 films and have forever because, I saw that when I was just like, this is my guy and I love him.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Well, so our usual things, please leave us a review. We would love to hear from you. Also, if you want to become a patron, we're about to announce soon new benefits for our patrons on Patreon. And that website is, take it, Elizabeth.
Patreon.com/commonroomradio.
And yes, you can be a patron for $1 a month or more, and we will be rolling out new benefits. And you can find us on Twitter at Just Say Podcast, where I will be tweeting about things that we'll be doing. And that's about it.
Yeah, I think so. Happy New Year, Daphne.
Happy New Year to you, sweetheart.
Until next time, I'm Elizabeth Stevens.
And I'm Daphne Olive. Can I Just Say Podcast is a Common Room Radio production. For more information and our other shows, visit commonroomradio.com. To show your support, pledges of as little as $1 a month can make a big difference. Visit patreon.com/commonroomradio to pledge support and access bonus features that are just for patrons. And join the conversation by using the hashtag #CanIJustSay and follow us on Twitter at JustSayPodcast. We request that you keep your tweets respectful and positive, and you can always email us at podcast@commonroomradio.com. Thanks for listening.
Mamma mia, ignatare, figlia mia, benissimo. Si devia lo scarpare, il va, quando sogno il mano dai. Si la figlia, non sia, non è la figlia mia.